which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The motion to open the planning board meeting of Wednesday, June 11th.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
First up, 426 Old Route 22 proposed trail of Lawrence. Lawrence Lane. Everybody. So we're excited to be here tonight and share with you a little bit about our trails project. My name is Lauren Zane. I lead a charitable foundation that our core work is grant making in areas that are meaningful to our founders and in communities that they care deeply about. And most of that grant making is in education, and one of the other areas that is meaningful to them is outdoor recreation. And so they spend a lot of their time over the last several decades out in the community. They've had ties to the community for the last 25 years. Road biking and hiking, and then have also spent a bunch of time out west mountain biking. And as they ride on the road bike in this community, they look around and they see the topography and they see the beautiful landscape, and they just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could put more trails in this community and make it accessible to the public so that everybody could enjoy it. And so because our founders that have a charitable entity, they said to us, now we have the capacity to take a look at this with you guys, see if it's possible to find really wonderful land in the community and see if it's possible to make trails. So we spent a lot of time looking at land in the area, and this spring we were able to acquire just over 450 acres. And our plan is to put trails on there for mountain biking and hiking and have it completely publicly accessible. We were really excited that the land that we found is in Menia. We were excited that it's close by to downtown, that there's the MTA nearby, and there's just so much to be able to connect to around here that we think makes it hopefully exciting to you all. Our plan would be to start in phases, so initially maybe do 10 to 12 miles of trail, and then get feedback. See what the town thinks, see what you all think, see what the ridership is, what the how many people come out to hike, what people are looking for, and then based on feedback, get a sense for what else we might want to do in terms of adding additional trails or picnic benches or whatever else might be that comes up that people are interested in. So I'll stop there. Our goal tonight is really to share more about ourselves with you, but also to hear from you what you think of this idea and to get feedback from you all so far, and talking to folks around town that we've been able to connect with. Most people have expressed enthusiasm and excitement that the land will be preserved. There are no plans for structures on the land. At this time, we're going to start with the trails and to again to make it available. I think maybe just to orient everyone, so this is do you want to talk a little, maybe you should just talk a little bit about the property, where it is, how many acres, what the intention is, where access would be, and the trailhead and parking and stuff. Absolutely. So in your packet, if anybody needs some extra copies, there's a trail map. The entrance would be at the property that's 426 Old Route 22. There's an existing driveway off of Route 22. There's an entrance and an exit. There's a house right at the front of the property that comes right up to Route 20, Old Route 22. That house is not inhabitable, so it is likely that will be demolished and potentially used for parking. The other two properties we acquired from the Levin family, they are to the east of the 426 Old Route 22, up and over Rattlesnake Bridge. Anybody else you want to know about?
Well, just for the record, we were not authorized to review this in any detail. We did have a discussion with Mike Singleton. Mike and I are some Mike Singleton is the town building inspector. Mike and I are both familiar with 426 Old Route 22. It was an interesting piece of property, has a somewhat colorful history, and the building that exists there has been technically declared unsafe and uninhabitable. Mike advises me that they've kind of cleaned it up and they've boarded it up to some degree, but before anything moves forward, a final disposition on that structure is going to have to be determined, and whether it stays, if it stays, it's got to be, looks like it might require extensive work. If it's going to be demolished, that's okay. It does have perhaps some historic elements to it, because it was a house that was added on over time. It used to be part of the old farm there. So I think that's an item that does have to be addressed going forward. And there are driveways into it. I'm not sure either one of them would comply with New York State DOT standards, especially the one that's immediately adjacent to the house. It's kind of steep, a little rugged, and the lines of sight aren't the best because of the way that rain juts out. But other than that, the rest of the balance of the property looks like it is, lends itself to what they want. And there is sufficient flat area down at the bottom. The house is on one side, there used to be a trailer and some other things. They used to have a garden on the opposite side. That all could be reclaimed, and you could have a nice parking area and trailhead there, but it's going to require some work, and it's going to require some involvement from New York State DOT. And then I think it does, there is a power line that runs up through there. I'm not sure what the easement situation is with that power line, but sometimes when you have trails and other things crossing power lines, there is some involvement and some permitting that may be required by, I would imagine it's New York State Electric and Gas. Thank you. So that's another issue that has to be developed. And the most unfortunate thing here, is the way it falls, and maybe it's not unfortunate, is that because this use publicly accessible trails with a trailhead is not a named use in your code, it's not that it's not allowed, it is allowed, but it is allowed by special permit, but the special permit is to be issued by the town board. So what ends up happening is ultimately these folks would have to, as their plans evolve, would have to make application to the town board. I would suspect in its wisdom the town board is going to refer to you folks for some comment and input, but the actual ultimate special permit, because of the vagaries of your code, gets issued by the town board. I guess that's enough.
Go ahead.
I have a couple of questions, but first, thank you, Foundation. I think it's wonderful that we're looking to do this, not here, but almost everywhere. Are there any county sign-offs we need for this?
County Road.
You're probably going to need a 239M referral. Well, the town board will need a referral, and they'll probably, but there are no county permits, I believe.
Okay. In terms of agreement with Amenia, so that it's open to everyone, and the other one would be a hold harmless. That was,
I don't know the details.
okay, but what kind of agreement would the town have to get from them to allow access? Okay,
Yeah.
something that we want to know. Okay.
And also it would be something that Ian Lindbar would be involved in.
Okay. And I'm concerned about liability and hold harmless, all of that, someone gets into an accident, an injury, who's responsible?
Well, that's, unfortunately, it's going to be owned and operated by a private entity, so thankfully, you're out of the chain of issue.
Yeah.
The only other thing
More
is,
trails.
he did get a letter from Mike Sickleton representing probably the fire districts as well. The width of the trail is going to be an issue that will have to be discussed. I think their initial proposal, they were looking at 3 foot. That's a little narrow, and if you're talking mountain biking and other things, it's generally a 6 to 8 foot cleared area with a 6 to 8 foot tread. But in this case, the off-road vehicle that the fire departments run require a 6 foot width. And for emergency response, we would look to see that at least primary trails would be in that width.
Thank you.
And that would be my only concern is if the town is approving something that we know has some inherent risk or danger, then we might end up getting some liability, especially now sitting on this letter.
And that's something,
But
that's
I'm sure-
great, great above my answer.
But I'm sure you will address this, and you've seen the letter?
I have not seen the letter.
What's that, Mike second, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
If you want, you can take my copy.
Okay, great.
Yeah, got my initials.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
Sorry, Maureen.
does
That's okay,
the,
thank you so much.
does the nonprofit maintain the trails on a regular, continued basis typically?
Yes, so the answer is the foundation is going to be responsible for ensuring that there's continued maintenance of the trails. We would actually work with a third-party trail maintenance organization in order to do the trail maintenance. And so we've spoken to several people in the broader region who do this kind of work, and that's required of our insurance company. You want a third-party trail maintenance organization that has experience maintaining trails and has all required safety certifications. And so that's our goal. We haven't selected someone specifically, but we will have a third party and we'll make sure they keep good records and regularly visit the property, look for down trees, other things that need to be addressed.
Thank you.
Hi, Lauren, I'm Foz, I don't have to hear you speak. Hi, thank you so much for this proposal. I think it's a great idea. I think it would enhance our community. I do have just two questions for you related to access. One is that you're saying that this is near the train station, which it is, but I don't believe there's pedestrian access to it. And Route 22 is a busy road. So, you know, as you think about this plan, consider a way for pedestrians to potentially get there on foot. Also, the same for bicyclists who are coming from Route 22. There's no bike lane of any kind that I'm aware of on that road, and the cars go by very quickly. So think about safety for those bikers and pedestrians.
Okay, so it sounds like, well, first of all, thank you for coming. It sounds like your next step is to try to get on a town board agenda and make a similar presentation. I think ultimately, if they're going to be the approving agency, they'll probably refer the site plan to us for our review. So we will see you again. But in the meantime, you know, keep in touch, let us know the status of the project, and we're happy to support public recreation here.
And so would that then mean that we could go ahead and put the site plan together or the application, or is the meeting with the town board similar to this, which is like a pre-approval discussion where they tell us what to look into?
I would say the latter.
Okay.
You might want to have just a preliminary discussion with the supervisor and the code enforcement officer to see what your next step is. But at minimum, I think you're going to need to address his comments about design and width and shoulders and materials and access and impervious coverage and drainage patches, lighting, all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think you need to have a preliminary discussion with the town board and then go ahead and submit a special permit application
Okay.
to them. And if they need any help, you can point you in the right direction for what form to use.
Okay. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you. I was remiss. Welcome, Faz Bala, our new planning board member. It's your first meeting, terrific, great, welcome. We're very happy to have you on.
Welcome.
All right, next up, who's in
of Grandma Consilery. It filed with Leeson's house, which is located at 54 Hill Road. And it is going to be a Grandma Consilery that is on the side yard of the property. It's based off the east side of the house. We are looking to install 28 panels with 2 inverters, and it's going to be used for his personal use. And anything extra can go back to the grid for crediting.
John?
As far as I'm concerned, Madam Chairperson, a complete application, they addressed all your issues, particularly the visibility from off-site, which they determined there is none, you can't see it from there. And other than that, it seems to be a fully compliant, application, and, it's ready to move ahead with the resolution. For that, I would defer to council.
Type 2 action under significant. So, no environmental review is required. It's also been referred to the county planning department, and they sent back with saying that there's no countywide or other impact, it's a matter of local concern. We've drafted the proposed resolution, we have that available for the board to consider, and to read it, if you would like.
Anybody have any questions? Yeah, why don't we skip to the,
Now therefore,
yes.
now therefore be it resolved that in accordance with section 121-65C of the zoning law, planning board hereby waives those items required by 125-65B, typical for more substantial plan applications, including but not limited to on-site utility systems, topography, traffic flow, elevations, plans for construction and demolition, debris, and then in accordance with 121-65, the planning board hereby approves the site plan submitted for the application and authorizes the planning board chairman to stamp and sign the approved plans on payment of all of the outstanding invoices for the planning board's consultants. To further resolve the pursuant to New York State Town Law, Section 274A, and zoning law 165. Planning board hereby approves the site plans and authorizes the chairperson to stamp and sign on payment of all outstanding invoices. We have to keep that resolved out because redundant on the first one. Be it further resolved that in accordance with the zoning law, the site plan approval shall expire if the applicant fails to commence construction or to obtain the necessary building permits for construction within 18 months of this resolution. The planning board does have the authority to grant a one-time 6-month extension. This site plan approval may be revoked by the planning board if the applicant violates the site plan approval or engages in any construction not authorized by the site plan approval. Any violation of the site plan or its conditions shall be deemed a violation of the zoning law and shall be subject to enforcement action. We further resolve that a copy of this resolution shall be filed in the office of the town of the town clerk within 5 days of this resolution, and also sent to the applicant within the same 5-day period. As the applicant, you'll note that one of these resolve clauses is in big bold capital letters. That's to make sure that you guys get the work done before the approval expires, okay? So that's, anyway. With that, sure.
Roll call vote, Madam Chair.
Yeah, motion first.
The motion to approve the site plan for the ground mounted solar energy system at 54 Camel Road.
Second. We have discussion on the resolution before the vote. This is somewhat generic, almost any resolution, but if the site plan approval may be revoked by the planning board if the applicant violates the site plan approval, etc. How do we determine if the project has violated the zoning? And what
They
is
need to go to the building permit, and Mike Singleton is the enforcement authority. And if you would determine that there's a violation, then that would come back to us.
I'd like to discuss this further because it's more of a general nature question and issue than it is for this specific.
Sure.
Thank you.
So let's move forward with the roll call, and then we can have that more general discussion.
After, yes.
Okay,
So I think there's motion and a second.
yeah, we got it.
Okay.
Foregoing resolutions voted on development in the planning board voting as follows. Robert Boyle Jr., chairperson, absent. Nina P., deputy chairperson.
Yes.
James Walsh, absent. Walter Dietrich,
Yes.
Kenneth Polsky,
Yes.
Katie Vicky-Yellow,
Yes.
and Lizette Bullock.
Yes.
Motion passes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, resolution granting site plan approval for a ground-mounted solar energy system at 390 Old Route 22 for Douglas Brown. Hi.
Hello. Hopefully everyone's doing well today. Good to see you all again. My name is Miguel Sines with Empire Solar Solutions. I handle most of the operational work. We are proposing the installation of a residential ground-mounted solar array at the mentioned property. And it's going to be an 11.48 kilowatt system consisting of 28 REC panels that are each rated at 110 watts. This will be at the south end of the property, and it's going to take up a total of 577 square feet. So,
For the purposes of the new board members, do you or John want to just give a little
I
summary
was
of the
gonna-
history of this project? Okay.
This project, just to refresh everybody's memory, has had a long and colorful history. They originally came to us for a subdivision with solar, ground-mounted solar energy system. The solar energy system they originally proposed was too large, and it didn't fit within our code. They attempted to get a use variance, and they were discouraged from that. They saw fit to downsize the solar energy panel. They proceeded with the subdivision to some degree. The solar energy panel, where they finally placed it, required an area variance for a yard. They got that from the ZBA. They completed the subdivision process, and then, for reasons unknown to those of us here, they failed to file it in a timely manner, so they had to come back, and we found, long and short of it is, the subdivision plan has been filed, the ZBA approval is in place, they have addressed everything we've asked for. The solar energy system, my understanding, sits in a box on the front lawn of this particular property, and they would very much like to install it. And having said that, it is my understanding that they have completed all the necessary steps. We have all the information. Both Paul and I are satisfied, and we would really ask you to move this along. We don't normally do that, but this one has been here too long.
Again, we have a draft resolution, it does the recitations along the lines with John and the applicant we're speaking to. Again, it's a type 2 secret action, so there's no further environmental review that's required. It has been referred to the county planning department because of its proximity to Old New York State Route 22. We're within 500 feet of state road. It has to go to county, and the county provides advisory recommendations back to the planning board. In this case, they determined that it's a matter of only local concern. There are no county-wide impacts. So the planning board can move forward with its resolution. Now therefore be it resolved in accordance with the zoning law, planning board waives those items required in the zoning law, typical for more substantial site plan applications. It's the same list of items that I spoke to for the prior application. It approves site plans, and the planning board, the chairman is authorized to state to sign these plans upon payment of loss, invoices. There is, again, a second resolve clause that will eliminate that, basically says the same thing. And be it further resolved that according to the zoning law, the site plan approval shall expire if the applicant fails to commence construction, obtain necessary building permits within 18 months. And work can grant one-time 6-month extension. The site plan approval may be revoked on planning board if the applicant violates the site plan approval or engages in any construction or alteration not authorized by the site plan approval. Any violation of the site plan approval or its condition shall be deemed a violation of the zoning law and shall be subject to enforcement action. The attorney resolved that a copy of this resolution shall be filed in the office of the town clerk within 5 days of the resolution, and copies shall also be provided to the applicant within the same 5-day period. So you can call for a motion.
So moved. Oh, sorry.
Because I've been to previous meetings, can you, I looked on Google Maps and I didn't see a structure there, is there a house there?
Yes. It's behind a lot of trees. The road has nearly a forest of landscape there, but there is a home, I believe it's actually 2 different structures that are on the property, both owned by him.
If I may, there are structures on there, and depending upon what vintage of Google Maps we looked at, the structure, as a matter of fact, the first application, we didn't know there was a house on it either. So the house was constructed, it didn't make the mapping right away, but each house has, each lot, there are 2 lots adjacent, has their own structure on it. And they are legally permitted houses, the building inspector has reviewed them and permitted them.
Thank you.
Interestingly enough, just as a sidelight, this property immediately adjoins 426 Old Route 22 at the south end. Second is 10.
Any other questions?
Yes. We have a motion in a second.
Do we have a
Yeah, you
motion?
did. Jamie's
And
hand.
a second?
And then
Second.
All right. Roll call vote.
The foregoing resolution is voted upon with all members of the planning board voting as follows. Robert Boyle, Jr., chairperson, absent. Nina Peak, deputy chairperson.
Yes.
James Walsh, absent. Walter Dietrich,
Yes.
Ken Posky,
Yes.
Jamie Yellow,
Yes.
and Lizette Bullock.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Sure, Miguel does too.
And I asked that Mr. Broughton diligently pursue his building permit.
No, absolutely, we're
So we don't
all
let
over
this
it.
slide.
All over it.
I know.
John, the tears.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Keen Scott.
Yeah, that's-
You need anything from us?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, please, you guys want to come up front? And then, because I think this was intended to be more just of a discussion.
Sure. Sure, I can just introduce our team. So Dan Nicola from Sobel Development, Weingarten, Wise, and Whitaker. We also have Peter Sander from Marine Engineering, and as well as the principal working staff, Juan Torres. I know we have a new member here, so I just wanted to introduce ourselves. And obviously, the last time we were here was in April, and this has been an ongoing project that has been with the town for almost 5 years at this point. So, if you need anything from us, we're happy to answer any questions.
John, you want to start?
I guess I can start. At the last meeting, we're trying to keep this project moving forward, and it's our goal to keep it going somewhere. And we were asked to prepare a Part 2 environmental assessment. Me, all of myself. We did that. We prepared a draft. I brought it with me this evening. It is not meant to insult you or to hurt your feelings. This should be considered a take-home exercise. What Paul and I did is put this together using the best available information. And if you can take one, pass it down. And there's a couple things you need to know. First off, it was prepared using what Paul and I found to be an outdated set of documents. The EAF was the one that I had in my possession that was signed. The last one we got was dated 8/28 of 2023. As you all know, the project has evolved. They also did a bunch, back in the beginning, they prepared a bunch of supplemental reports. They prepared a traffic report, they prepared, I think, an archaeological, they've done a few other things. So the first thing that we would look to do is, now that the project, I think, has had somewhat solidified, a couple properties dropped out, they've reduced the acreage. So what we would ask is, we would like the board to require the applicant to provide an updated and complete FEAF Part 1 and package it with any current supporting documentation, so that when you do start to review this, you have the most current and up-to-date information in your hands.
I just speak to that because, it's really important that the board understand that there is a lot of, Bob's used to be in particular, to get been around it. There's a lot of information that's been developed. They had to go through a whole conservation analysis, and this board made conservation findings based on that analysis. They looked at a lot of the information that is typically looked at during the secret process. And the zoning law does say that during secret you can require additional information to be developed. But a lot of that information has already been developed. Like with respect to archaeology, typically we look for an archaeological report and a sign off from the State Historic Preservation Office. I believe we have that, right? Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of information.
There's a lot of information out there, is I think what Paul's just.
Yeah, but all of that comes together to support your review of the FEAF Part 2. John, take it away.
Okay, so, again, we're not gonna go through this line by line. The Part 2 EAF is an evaluation of the potential impacts associated with this project. You will notice it is a series of questions, and those questions then have, if you answer yes to any of them, it then refers you to sections in the FEAF Part 1. So this is an objective analysis. You go through, you read what is in the FEAF, and you make a determination. Having said that, there are basically 3 areas that we identified that had possible moderate to large impacts. We're not making a qualitative analysis, this is just merely looking at the data. And those 3 areas are agricultural resources. Obviously, this is a large farm, and they're partitioning it into smaller properties, the intent being to maintain the farming nature. But it is nonetheless, it's a 600-acre parcel being whacked up into smaller parcels. So there's an impact on agriculture. Aesthetic resources. You've all had experience with the aesthetic resources. Obviously, that has a potential large impact. All right? And then the last one, there are 2 questions near the end that I grouped together and I considered them because the EAF breaks them apart, but it's community plans and community character. So what you have to look at is, how does it fit with the comprehensive plan? How does it fit with your community, its appearances and other things? Beyond the aesthetics, it's how it works with your community. So I highlighted those areas for your convenience. And again, this is your consultant's work product. It is not meant, it is for you to have a basis by which you do your own analysis. You could consider me 100% way off base. That's up to you. But this serves as a starting point. And then the next step is you have to go through, do your own analysis, make your own determinations, and then you have to kind of weigh the impacts. First of all, you have to agree that they're moderate to large. And then second, you have to make a determination in your mind whether they would have a significant adverse impact upon the environment. And I think Paul's and my recommendation would be to wait until you have the updated information. And I would also suggest that when you get to that point and are ready to do your analysis, Paul's going to have a reference. I would suggest you take a look at the Secret Handbook, the 4th edition 2020 version, which can be found at the New York State DEC website. It does a fairly credible job of defining things. And just because, and you've heard, I think Diana say this a lot, just because something is a large to moderate impact doesn't necessarily mean it is a significant adverse impact. It may just be big, but it's mitigated, it's handled, it can be dealt with. And so that's my piece of the pie. And then I'm going to turn it over to Paul and let him go through the next steps and options.
Just 1 second, what was the secret?
It is the Secret Handbook.
We'll get you the links.
It's 4th edition 2020. And you go to the New York State DEC website, and if you type in Secret Handbook, it'll take you there.
You can just do it in Google search. Secret.
Yeah.
But we'll get you the links.
Yeah.
For both of those, because,
Thank you.
there is an addition to the Secret Handbook, there's actually a worksheet that goes through the FEAF, question by question, and kind of tells you what they're looking for when they're looking at that. I think there's one thing that John didn't mention was, I've reviewed this, and I'm in agreement with essentially his assessment. And this is based upon our having gone back and spent a little bit of time to remind ourselves what we looked at before, all the conservation analysis, all the information that has been developed that we presented to you. But what we found, and this is, I guess, kind of been our thinking all along, this is a 26 lot subdivision. That there's likely, the likelihood of water from the wells, that's not an issue, the septic's not an issue. We've shown the archaeology, that is not an issue. And so, as we went through this, the way it breaks down when we go through the FEAF Part 2 is that if you answer yes on impact on land, then you go to the sub-questions, and you look at back at the FEAF Part 1 that John was referencing, but also the voluminous information that the applicant has provided. And based on that, our sense, our evaluation, not without prejudice to the board, is that with the exception of those 3 or 4 items that John mentioned, we see this as no minimal impact potentially for all of the other areas. And so, and that's very important for the next step, because the next step, with respect to any moderate to large impact that's identified, before you make your secret, or as part of your secret determination, you have to explain why that is, or that is not, or may be a potential significant adverse impact. So if you, for example, with the agriculture, if the board's sense is that, yes, it is a potential moderate, these are all potential impacts. These are not absolutely certain or defined impacts. But if you find for agriculture, for example, yes, it's a moderate to large impact, because we're involving a lot of agricultural land. But you look at the proposal that the applicant has provided, and you may say, well, they're going to break it up into 26 very large lots. they're gonna retain the agricultural use and the potential for the agricultural use on all of those lands as compared to what may occur to that property. You can say, well, yes, it's a moderate to large impact, but it's not a potential significant adverse impact, okay? On the other hand, with respect to visual, and obviously there's been a lot of conversation about the potential visual impacts, and the potential inconsistency with the comprehensive plan. You may say, yes, these are moderate to large potential impacts, and they do have the potential to be a significant adverse impact. If you identify one potential significant adverse impact, then that triggers the requirement of an environmental impact statement process. And essentially, you would be making what they call a positive declaration that there is the potential for at least one significant adverse impact. And then what SEQA requires is a process. The first step in that process is scoping of the issues. And one of the things, and I was actually involved in the redrafting of the SEQA regulations when I was still in New York State. One of the ideas behind scoping is to really narrow down the focus of the environmental impact statement so that you're looking at the issues that are really the ones that have the most potential significance for having an adverse impact. And that process, so what happens is you make a positive declaration, you say, here's 1, 2, 3, these are the potential significant adverse impacts, and then you draft, either the board drafts or the applicant drafts, a scoping document that is a proposed scope of the environmental impact statement. That is presented and is available for the public to comment on. And after a period of time, and you may want to have a public meeting to even allow public comment on it, after a certain point in time, the planning board would say, okay, this is the final scope. This is going to be the scope of the environmental impact statement that will be developed in a draft form by the applicant. They go back and they do a draft environmental impact statement, and they bring it to you, and you look at it. If it's complete, you say, good, let's have a public hearing on that and gather public comment. If you say it's incomplete, you need to explain why, and then they need to go back and do a little more homework and bring it back to you. At some point, it gets to the point where it's complete, and then you have a public hearing on that, and public comment is generated. The applicant responds to all of the public comment, and then they come back to you with what is referred to as the final environmental impact statement. And you go through the whole iterative process again. If you don't really like, if there are things that are missing from that you want to see, you provide that detail to the applicant. They would go back, they would bring you a redraft, and at some point you make a determination, or you would make a determination that the final EIS is acceptable. It becomes your environmental impact statement at that point. And you are accepting that, you're saying, this is done, we have done all of the exploration of these potentially significant adverse impacts that we need to. And at that point, along the way, the application is, the rest of the information needed for the application was developed. And we come to a point where the board would make findings on the final impact statement, and there's certain, I'll share with you the findings that are made, and then you make your decision on the subdivision. So that's kind of an overview of the process, and as we've heard from the board, and John and I have reflected back on the information developed to date, what our suggestion to the board for consideration would be is to consider possibly doing very narrowly focused environmental impact statement that is really just, it's surgically looking at the visual impact and the community plan impact, inconsistency, community character, inconsistency, and potentially agriculture. I don't know where I thought. I mean, that'll be up to you all. But
Can I start with the
Yeah.
But hang on one second, I'm very, very sorry, but I have to be excused for a minute, so can you hold that?
oh, please, yeah, absolutely.
I'll be right back.
Excuse me.
Motion to pause. It happens.
It happens to me all the time. People are leaving.
Where's the popcorn?
Any other questions? We have an access to your very engaging, cooperative motivation.
They should, I can forward a copy.
Yeah, you can.
Well, that's
Basically, great.
It's on my to-do list.
Notice, I think what John was referring to was essentially, and maybe, I don't know how you want to do it, but maybe, I know you guys have all the files, and just maybe provide one big link,
Yeah,
so we could, like we do in Tralca.
yeah, for good conservation analysis.
Yeah. all
Yeah,
this stuff is done. I
It's
know.
a really big file, so.
I want to see what's perfect.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll forward a copy of this with the conservation finding statement we received that was based off this document. And then you guys will have the latest copy.
Yes, because you want the EAF, you want all of the carbon storage project. You want.
You're supporting,
Yeah.
that. If,
Because we haven't submitted a plan since September, since that parcel was, those two parcels were approved.
2023.
The only one I could find, the last one I could find in the record, had a signature date of May 28, 2023.
I think we submitted one back in September, but we.
That was the September one.
Okay.
You borrowed it from the previous year, you didn't know it.
Yeah, because they really hadn't changed since then, so, okay.
So all I'm looking for, I mean, just to re-echo what Paul says, if you end up,
Good to know.
Diana, pulling everything together in a summary and say, traffic study dated, unrevised, can be found here, just kind of a one-page summary if they already exist in the record. It's just that, so the planning board doesn't play hunt pack for where this stuff is. Because when I started going through this process started back in 2022?
2021.
Somewhere there, and I'm that much older and my memory is not that good. So,
Paul, before we go further, I'd like to make sure I'm clear on something, and really it's just about procedure, not about Keen Stud per se. This is the first time we're seeing this.
that is correct.
There was the original, right?
In terms of a part two
The
EAF,
part two.
nothing has ever been submitted to you before. This is the first time that we were asked to do it.
I'm just curious, again, not specific to Keen Stud, but just the process going forward. Would this not normally be circulated to the board before we sit in a public board meeting and look at it?
The answer to that is yes, but what we had hoped to do is bring it to frame the discussion tonight. I didn't mean to blindside you. This has been sitting on my desk for almost 2 weeks.
I would say that just as a matter of process, like,
Absolutely.
this particular issue, this particular subdivision obviously will be the source of lots of conversation and public comment, and we're trying to know how to go as smoothly as possible. But, and ultimately, I've said this before, when I abstain because I'm sitting on an ethics opinion from the ethics board that I don't have to agree with, but that's the position I'm put in. But just more as a matter of process, Keenstud aside, if you come in and put a part two in front of us that has the answers, and somebody in the board disagrees with an answer, it's an awkward situation, then
I don't think that's what they're doing, though. I think they're doing it to help us move forward. They're basically, we can disagree with everything we want, so. This is not too dissimilar from the process that we followed with Troutbeck. We gave you drafts ahead of time, and there was a couple times that people on the board took issue with what we had marked and repositioned it. So the whole thing here was to kind of give you a sense of the process and have a point that you could look at going forward. And again, as I started that conversation, that was Paul's and my opinions. That's all it is. You folks make the final decision. So Jane, to be honest with you, sir, if you found 10 of those to be incorrect, I would not be offended at all. I'd say thank you.
I would just ask that we circulate these things
We debated that and we thought.
internally.
We typically do, this is a different project and the process has been different. And we're trying to wrap our hands around moving forward in a more efficient way. And so the idea tonight was basically prompt discussion for the board so that you have our initial thoughts on this. We could have given you a blank. We could have given you a blank form. But we thought it might be better because we're the ones who've been here for the entire process to date, rather than to load you up with 2,000 pages of documents, or at least give you our initial reaction based on the 5 years we've spent on the project. So that's what we are. It's no disrespect to the board at all, and it's not the normal process. You're right. I think ordinarily we would be bringing this to you. Seeker really wants you to make this determination at the earliest possible point. And there's been some back and forth in terms of the board's approach. I wanted to move forward with the Seeker review of this project. And I think that what we have heard is now that the board wants to move forward efficiently, and so our effort here was to try and
But I would suggest the most efficient thing would be to not be looking at it for the first time in a public meeting. Right? If we saw this a few days ago, and that would be more efficient.
we didn't expect to go through it tonight, except for the main purpose, Jamie, was to identify those issues that have stood out in the discussions the board has had to date as potentially significant adverse impacts. And to talk about the process going forward and a suggested way of doing that in a way that's efficient and that gives the applicant the opportunity to.
And I understand it, but I would say to you, and again, not specific to Keenstud, but it makes a very awkward situation because if a board member thinks, or multiple board members, disagree with anything in here one way or the other, there is no document in the public sphere that says that the engineer and the attorney feel this way about it.
Steve, can I say something?
Yeah.
I take a different view. I take the view that this is extremely helpful, especially with a new member and everything. You're just giving this as a guideline for you to review. We still have to review everything in this and go back and look at all these things up. It's not that, and they've said multiple times that it's just what they looked at, what they think could be. They're not saying it is, they're not. So this to me, when he explained everything, now I have a better understanding to go forward and do my job. So that's just my opinion. I understand what you're saying.
I guess I would just ask for future ones, not the Keenstud, because I'm not voting anyway. I would like to see this before I come to the meeting, filled out,
Well, historically, this board has asked Paul and I on every project to take a first cut at it. That's why, if you look at this, it says draft and about it, it says draft on every page and in the title block. This is not yet your document. So, I understand your point, it will not happen again, but again,
but maybe the board disagrees with me, so.
this
I mean,
is,
it's something that I think, and I agree to some extent, and I think your point has been heard. And I understand why, because we don't want all of a sudden to see something, and then all of a sudden, it's bad that the public can hear something that maybe we haven't agreed upon, they don't have the information, and suddenly there are lots of phone calls. So I think that, you know, just as long as we figure out a way to deal with that. I have two other questions. And forgive me, this is in a non-professional, ignorant, layman sense. So basically, the feeling is that certain areas are close enough or pretty much there that it doesn't need a lot of review. There are some others that might, and then we can go with a revised statement, and then we can come up with something that results in an an environmental assessment, right? And that would abrogate the reason to do SECRA.
That would be doing secret.
But it would be doing it in a compressed manner, because what we'd be saying, again, this is the layman, all these issues we don't have to review again, they've already been reviewed in our secrets, so we're just preserving page 5A and page 6C as the issues we really have to delve in, everything else has been resolved to date. Was that sort of,
Yeah, I think what would happen at the end of the process, you know, because they're gonna need to bring in a lot more information about the details of the project. And, you know, that, information, you would anticipate, based on our experience, is not gonna trigger any additional potential significant adverse impacts. However, if that changed, then you might ask for additional information. But we don't anticipate that. I think what you would see at the end is you'd have a final environmental impact statement that focuses on the visual, outline, community character, potentially the agriculture. And then you would have a negative declaration with respect to all the other issues. And that would complete your whole secret review, because you have made your positive declaration for those several issues, and then a negative declaration for the remainder, and then make your decision on the subdivision.
but as we're doing our review of this, when we get the amended assessment form, we still can go, you know, they said the impact on the land was not affected, but yet I think it is, and we still could provide our comments and want to review that further. It's not limited.
it is not limited, and again, I would just direct your, if you look, let's just take impact to land. Is there an impact to land? You have to see a specific part of the EAF. You look at that, you can't help but answer yes. So you answer yes, and then you have to go through each one of these. And each one of them has a relevant question. So for instance, the first one says, proposed action may involve construction on land where the depth to the water table is less than 3 feet. They have a document that says the water table is greater than 5 feet. So the simple answer is no. There's no impact, okay? So in some of these, and they're not subjective answers. You have to, some of the subjective ones get a little more complicated. But you're looking at, when you read the secret document, there's two things: significance and importance and a couple of, but here you're looking at the facts. And the facts are the EAF Part 1. That's supposed to be all the documentation, the summary of the information. And then, you know, you go from there.
Okay, so, we're doing this because this process has taken so long, and we are, want to be sensitive to everyone who comes here, and it's unfair for them to wait and so on. And that's why we don't do it on every project.
I think the applicant had requested to, typically what would happen is we would get the EAF part one, and seeker encourages the board to make a negative positive declaration fairly quickly, to provide guidance and certainty to the applicant. But my understanding, I don't think I was here at the very beginning of this project, but that the applicant had requested to provide additional materials and substance to this board, sort of out to demonstrate that there wouldn't be any significant adverse, unmitigated environmental impacts. And that's why all the visual analysis was done sort of outside the boundaries of this, filling this out, because, you know, they wanted the opportunity to make that case, to provide that information to the board. And so that's why we find ourselves here now, filling out this form at such a late date, where because the applicant had requested an opportunity to provide that information outside the boundaries of a POSDEC and everything else.
That's a fair assessment of it, and I think that predates everybody.
Yeah.
Which is why this is so, it's an odd duck in terms of the process, because the focus has been on the visual, and, you know, so there's a lot of effort that both sides made to try and, you know, get that to a point where visual analysis can be done. But I think the recognition is that there is more need for more efficiency in the process, and that there is a desire to have more public involvement in the process. So at least that's what we've heard. So that was the idea behind suggesting that perhaps the board could, if you do feel there's a potential for a significant visual impact, that that's a basis for a positive declaration, and we can do environmental impact statement process that's really focused on that issue. As the rest of the project evolves and is put together, we get all the details to fill that out, so that it can all come together at the end in a more orderly process that involves the public.
So let's talk. I was just gonna say, what's next? Let's talk about what's the next step, for this and for the revised, part one, what is the expectation?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Deputy Chair, I had a couple of questions here, because I know that this is also something that we're also seeing for the first time. And I wanted to clarify a couple of points, at least from my perspective, which is that, as you mentioned, we've gone through the conservation analysis, and that we went through that entire conservation analysis before the commencement of SECRA, but we did address a lot of the issues, in depth regarding all the potential, alternatives, all the were visual studies that were done in conjunction with that. And so I just want to state that to the record, that has been something that went on for, I think, almost 3 years before we even made it to the point of starting SECRA. And so the other point I wanted to make is that there is currently a comprehensive plan in the town. I understand that there's a process that's ongoing, but there is a current plan that's in effect, and we have the goal, I think we have demonstrated that we are consistent with that comprehensive plan, but I just want to make that point to the record that in case there's any confusion with that, I don't know if that's something you want to advise the board about. And also, finally, I know that we have a new member, but when we were at the April meeting, we did present, and the board did see that we have a declaration of restrictions that we did provide that was the sort of the culmination of all the mitigation attempts that we've been talking to up till now. So while yes, we have taken that time to demonstrate it, that it culminated in a document that, we believe that does show that, that those potential impacts have been mitigated. But I just want to state that so it's clear, for the record. And again, this is a subdivision. We're not currently proposing any buildings. All of what we had talked about in the aesthetic realm has been for potential scenarios of build out, not what we're currently proposing. We're currently proposing the subdivision plan.
So the next steps, and why we brought this to you is not to get you, have you engage on it tonight, but is to take it home and to get the information that the applicant will provide in terms of an updated FEAF1, and also the link to the file so that you can catch up on all the information that's been developed over the last several years. And then ideally, at your pleasure, come back, perhaps at the next meeting, and go through this yourselves, and we can talk it through. We go through each of, and we can explain to you in more detail where our thoughts are. The applicant, if you want, they can weigh in as well, and make a determination, a secret determination on whether or not there are any potential adverse impacts that the project may result in. And if you find that there are, then we can have a draft resolution to that effect done, which would be a positive declaration. And then we can also bring to you a draft scope based on the issues that you identify as potentially having a significant adverse impact. And that would provide the guidance that the applicant needs to move forward. Now, if I may, just to focus in on the visual, George James has provided comments based on what the applicant last provided. John and I've looked at them, talked with George. A suggestion to the board, because that would be an integral part of any scope, draft and final scope, is that the board direct George James to work with Saratoga Associates, which is the visual expert for the applicant, and to try and find consensus on a methodology and report back to the board on, hopefully what that consensus is, so it can be included in the draft scope. I think that might be a more efficient way to have the conversation between the professionals. And of course, George James can come back and report to you where he continues to disagree with Saratoga Associates, or they can report that they found consensus and why. And I think that might be another helpful rule for the next meeting. That's board's wish.
Anybody have any thoughts on George meeting with the Saratoga Associates folks in between now and the next meeting to sort out methodology?
Sorting out methodology as opposed to showing renderings, the methodology meaning
It will lead to the rendering.
yeah, okay. And I have no idea what the requirements are for methodology that leads to rendering. I'm happy to express an opinion on something I know nothing about. That's why I'm sitting here. And I'm sure we can find other people who do as well. So, yeah, he's our consultant. I feel that I'd rather he did it than, no offense to any of my colleagues.
Yeah, no, I think the question was,
Okay.
we had sort of said, like, any discussions that's happening between the applicants and our results should happen in front of us. But the suggestion from Paul is that it happens not in front of us.
Oh, man, we can't hear a methodology discussion.
I have a tendency to think sometimes professionals, and even I get lost sometimes when visual guys are talking, you know, which camera lens do you want to use and how they, so there is a very technical and specific aspect. These folks have asked it a couple different times. What do you want to see and how do you want to see it? And I think the objective evaluation of what they give you is important. And you've heard Nina Pete say it a number of times, George asked for this and never saw it. So what we're saying is, let's let them sit down at a table, figure out what it is George really needs to see, get it to him, so that when we submit it, George and Saratoga can both nod affirmatively and say, hey, they've done a great job. We don't quibble over, then it becomes the subjective analysis of what they give you. And I think that's what we're looking for, is to take the mystery out of it and let the two professionals agree, this is how we're going to do it, and it shows what it shows at the end of the day. Does that make sense, sir?
Yeah, you know, don't shoot everything at Magic Hour. You know, shoot with the same sky cover, shoot with the same lens, right? Get better.
No, so, I mean, we have, you know, as you know, we have been asking for that, throughout this process. However, I mean, just from a procedural standpoint, I'm trying to understand what it is, you know, because I know what you've asked of us to submit at this point with the FDAF and the, the various studies. I mean, obviously, we won't be able to prepare that immediately with what we get back from Mr. James. And so, you know, ahead of the next meeting, so what is it that you had in mind that?
I think, you know, the ideal would be basically a final methodology that's been agreed to by that can then be incorporated into a draft scope. Because it would basically, it would lay out how the visual analysis will be done in a way that the applicant is comfortable with and the planning board is comfortable with, and that can then be presented to the public and say, this is what we're going to do, you know, to basically show what the potential visual impacts of this project would be.
Yeah, so I think the confusion on our part is that the methodology, the way that Andrew actually renders the visuals is really not too much into question. It's more of the worst case development scenario and the elements that we provided. So far what we've received is that the elements that we were proposing to render were insufficient. They were based off the deed restrictions provided in the covenants. But it sounds like if we're going to go through this whole scoping on the visual side of things, it kind of makes sense to hold off on working on these renderings if we're going to go through a whole scoping process to see what we should be rendering anyways.
The scope should include what that is going to be, you know, how it's going to be done, and what it's going to look at, okay? And basically give you the direction you need in order to go out and do that work, do those things.
And I'm going to go one step further, and Peter, I've been at the same meetings you are, I do the same thing, and I think that the abbreviation in the James memo is real world worst case scenario. And I think you folks have a real world worst case scenario in your mind. I think George has something different. And I think that's all part of the methodology. So in other words, I think that's got to be factored into the equation. Because at the end of the day, you need to have both parties, the visual analysis parties, agree that we put the worst case on paper for you to see. Am I wrong, or I think that's part, I interpret that as part of the methodology. I'm sorry.
The two of them need to figure it out. Our worst case scenario is basically grabbing the declaration of restrictions.
Understood.
Which we provided as a method of protection for the future. and we said, what's the maximum under there, and that's what we were going.
And I
If
think
there's a difference that George maybe wants to discuss with Saratoga, and they want to look all for it, we'll talk about it.
And I think
discuss it.
that's what, one, I'm on the same page as you are. I read your declaration, but I also read James had said, and said, take color of buildings. Maybe your restrictive covenant is too restrictive when it comes to color of buildings. So what would be, for instance, driving here, there's probably 15 white farmhouses on most of the historic farms approaching this particular property. To rule out a white farmhouse on a farm property may not be the real world worst case scenario. That may be a negative in your perspective, because it never looked like a farm. I guess I'm just trying to be practical and trying to put it in a real world scenario. And I think you're right. I think George and your consultant have to kind of agree. And you can't, and again, I don't presume to speak, I'm just a consultant, but I think it's important that they start on the same page.
Agreed. And
And I think
on our
we need to
side,
get-
that's the feedback we need. If the feedback is, hey, we want some houses to be white, like, we want to work together to make sure that the restrictions and the covenants reflect and address the concerns of the planning board and what we have. So if that is the direction they want to go, like, great, we can discuss it.
And I think what may hopefully happen is that when these professionals get together and they come up with an idea of what will meet what George is looking for in terms of real world worst case scenario, that you will come back and that will be presented to the board and they will either say, yeah, that sounds great, or ask George some probing questions and maybe tweak it a little bit, and maybe end up with, in a different place. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have a comfort level that the board is satisfied that when that visual is done, it will accomplish the goal of showing what this may look like in the future, potentially.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
And then just to say one more thing, but to just answer Peter's question, yes, hold off on doing the photo simulations until you get that methodology discussion settled between George and Andrew.
Right, and because it is a board decision, I would,
Correct.
well, I'd like to see the board also provide comments on the rendering elements list we've provided so far. So that way, George is operating, he understands what the board would like to see in the renderings and not just his own opinion on that.
I mean, fundamentally, I think one of George's comments, if you go back and look, is that he has a level of discomfort with the mechanism of these covenants and restrictions as the way to control what this is going to look like. So he has a sort of, and I think this board expressed that last time too, is that that may not be the best way to manage how this is going to look. But talk to George about it, and have Andrew talk to George about the best way to provide certainty that the visual, the photo simulations that you guys are preparing are a reasonable, real-world, worst-case scenario that don't rely on an external enforcement that this town may not be able to actually effectuate.
Well, yeah, and to that, I was not updated, but I just wanted to remind the board that this was something that we had asked for because we wanted to have some protection for the future to make sure that, they can show anything now, but unless that is what it's restricted to be, they can all end up looking like that 20,000 square foot house inside of a ranch. So it was to put some parameters, and we had asked them to do that. Now, the idea of whether it's a town enforcement or an HOA enforcement, that's not something that we've really ever talked about. But the idea was to put some sideboards around what's gonna be allowed there. Because for the most part, most of the houses are outside the scenic protection overlay, right? Or, I'm not sure what the breakdown is, but, you know, they may never come back to you. You know, so-
In the restrictions, we did include that anyone that wants to build a residence in the future, we're not proposing to build, anyone that wants to build in the future has to come back with a plan.
And that's where those covenants could be thoroughly reviewed by the board themselves
And-
at the time they're
yeah,
actually proposed.
I think from my standpoint, this is something we've always worked toward. You know, you guys made certain representations, and we said, okay, how do we make sure those representations come true? And, you know, one of the things was that having the proper real-world worst-case scenario would theoretically then work backwards so that you could develop what the reasonable restrictions are. In other words, you know, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you write the restrictions first and then prove your case? Or do you put together the real-world worst-case scenario and say, okay, this board says that's not what we want to see, okay? So let's work backwards and then tailor the restrictions so that we don't see that. I leave it up to you, I leave it up to the attorneys.
That's not what we asked for.
No, but that's what's evolved.
Yeah, I think for us is that we can continue to work together, the two professionals can develop something in progress. There are 3 visual studies in that conservation analysis. We were asked for 2.5 years to provide all these studies. We're working on the next ones and we're happy to work, but we need feedback. Like, hey, if we want to see some white houses, great. If we want to see some red farms, great. If we want to see less landscape, more landscape, if we want to maybe tweak some things around, great. The idea is that through these declarations and in the subdivision, we create guidelines for whoever in the future might build, and I don't know if they're gonna build, but at least they have a set of standards as to what they do.
I think just make a point, like in terms of secret, as you well know, you know, we're working with what we have in front of us for, what you have in front of you for secret, but as, you know, within what we're presenting, but when we get further down, if it gets down to site plan and that, and further down, when you actually have an actual proposal in front of you for building, you know, there's another opportunity to look at, is it consistent with what was previously reviewed, is it not consistent? So, you know, I just want your board, and your board attorney, which I'm sure they do, but that this is not some sort of end of the line, like we have to work everything out exactly at this juncture. We're looking at global concepts here, so that's.
All right, so it sounds like word is okay with George and Jonathan, Andrew talking. At some point, so you guys talk to each other. I guess theoretically, if you can sort it out by the 25th, by the next meeting, George is available to attend that meeting, so, but again, you know, depends on when y'all can connect. In the meantime, you're gonna resubmit the Part 1 EAF with the new site plan, the new acreages, the new all of that, and provide a link with all of the organized, most current analyses, nothing that's, you know, no longer relevant, just package it all together for the board to review. And then we'll figure out if you want on the agenda next time, it will be substantively for George and Andrew to present. And then we can figure out what the next steps are.
Well, yeah, it would be obviously helpful if we can get, you know, the board can communicate I can communicate with Ms. Jane just to let them know that, that's, so, yeah, you know, sooner rather than later.
Definitely. I'll talk with the
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Looks like almost 4 hours have elapsed. I'm not sure what happened, we like a time warp or something, but it says it was very weird. All right, other matters, minutes from 5:28.
I have actually made changes.
Okay.
I sent them to my It's very frustrating, for some reason my map at home will not let me make any changes purposely, and you have to write it download, so I sent it to work, do it, I sent it to send it, and I didn't get it. So I have to go back to work tomorrow and send it again, so I'd like to hold
I
off.
have some changes.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, so we'll send it to Judy, how's that?
okay. And so Judy will put this again on the agenda for next time. What else is on the agenda for the next? for the
All has
16th?
something else to bring up under other matters.
Oh, well, Walter brought it up, food truck, you might.
Oh, I
Yeah.
guess that one, and I said.
And what I can say with that is, Ian, when I spoke with him, he felt that, the language of the law is fine. The one thing I meant to look at, just looking at it just now, I haven't looked at it, was it does require 1/2 acre lots, which seemed like a lot. That puts just the property you all to consider. You also mentioned that their draft would allow food trucks in every zoning district, and he thought that might be something that the board might want to comment on.
I submitted a bunch of comments.
You did?
Yes.
Oh.
I circulated them to the board today. Did everyone get them?
No.
They did?
No.
All right, well, I'll resend it, but I submitted a bunch of comments. Essentially, the law is verbatim copied from the Red Hook, and with the exception of the provision that allows food trucks in every district. Red Hook only allows them in commercial district, which I think we should do. I think we should allow food trucks in every district, only in commercial district, because there's a provision in this law that allows a maximum of 3 food trucks permitted on any lot at any one time for up to 9 months a year. So effectively, like, you could have three food trucks parked on the residential lot next to you with 12 parking spaces and outdoor seating and for 9 months of the year. Like
Just
having a restaurant.
hypothetical, what kind of food is that?
Nothing
So,
you like.
I think that it makes a whole lot of sense if we want to have them long-term, 9 months, but if that's what we consider seasonal, they should be only in commercial districts, like Red Hook does. The other thing is there isn't a lot of certainty about, it says 4 parking spaces, but it doesn't say per truck, a 1/2 acre lot, if you had the truck, the parking spaces, the outdoor seating, and there's a necessity, if you follow New York State sanitary code, that there be a bathroom for the person that works in the truck. Like, there's all these other requirements that don't seem to be referenced in here. I think it's a great idea. I think these should be, in commercial districts. I had put a comment in that I was like, I'm a little bit torn about the suburban residential district, because it is, generally more suburban. But for sure in the rural residential districts, I don't know that we want to allow that. It's a weird thing that you get a daily permit, but it lasts for 3 days. So maybe that's just for people who are on a mass vendor, but daily permits are usually like a day, not 3. And then, I just had a couple of other sort of minor, they have a size requirement that's 206 square feet. I don't know what that is, if it's a SH, like I went back to look at the, FHWA classes, like what, different kinds of trucks look like, with a little diagram in there, and I was like, what is 236 feet? Basically like a 4-axle truck, like a big giant dump truck. Fair enough, whatever, I don't know.
That's what makes sense to me.
Freestanding signs, right, like you're allowed to have as many signs as you want on the side of the truck, but then you also get a freestanding sign that doesn't say how tall it is, or if it has light, or, just some more specificity I think would be helpful. But I'm super in favor of these, I think it's a great idea, just don't think we should have them 3 on a lot from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. in any district at any time for 9 months of the year seems like a little excessive. But anyway, I agree, I made comments, I'll recirculate them.
Can I ask, did you do the track changes?
I did.
Would others wanna, when you get Nina's, just add to the track
Sure.
changes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I can get that back to Nina. Does that sound like a good process, Christina? Okay.
I'd like to bring one more matter before we close, because I'm struggling with something, and I'm not sure the form that's appropriate for it, but I think in a number of instances, since I've been on board, we have opened the door to having applicants come in and processes, before they start a formal process, to show us what they're thinking so that they can get our opinion. And I'm starting to realize that we may be setting a precedent where, once you ask us, what is your opinion on this, what should I do differently? It almost presupposes the end of that is an approval. Implicitly. And it sort of creates an obligation to treat all applicants equally. And I just think we need to give some thought for the future. We are where we are with the ones that are in flight, but for the future of what are the ramifications of that? There's not a question, there's a concern that,
We are supposed to treat all applicants.
I agree with you,
Oh, okay.
but
But the other thing, to be honest with you, your code does make allowances. And matter of fact, under subdivisions, there's an obligation for somebody to come in with sketch plan, to run it by you first. And in most cases, there's no obligation for approval. They still have to justify and meet all the standards in your code.
that's
The fact that you rendered a preliminary opinion and said, hey, that lot, 3 lots with 2 of them being flag lots, we don't think it's gonna work. You know, that's, they would have to justify it under your code, have to do other things. So, while I'm not quite sure I understand the question, you're not setting any precedent by providing comments to somebody pre-application.
It's preliminary, and most municipalities have a sort of pre-application process or conceptual review process. And it's without prejudice to the board,
okay.
you know, in terms of the ultimate determination based on the standards that the code provides. So I think it's helpful and it's general, and usually you're only looking at, you know, a simple sketch plan, you know, so you don't know all the details. And, you know, so things may change, and you may require changes as you get further into it. You see that, gee, this curve cut is not going to work, you know, either for the town or for DOT or whatever. And so you got to move it, or you're building, you know, you have an easement, you know, once you do your survey, there's an easement there, and you can't have a building where you have to propose. And if you move it over here, it's going to be too close, so you got to go get a variance from the ZBA, something like that.
But
It's a good
realistically,
question.
an informal discussion, pre-application, pre-having a formal application is non-binding on anyone. And you have no, you're not setting any precedent value. You know, you're just rendering opinion. And usually it's, is this gonna fly with you people? If it's not gonna fly, we'll walk away.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's the intent. So, but at the end of the day, under your code, they still have to check all the boxes, they still have to go through all the steps and demonstrate the viability of whatever they propose.
Yeah, I think of things like the utilities in the protected area with the bonus density on Cascade Creek, right? And now we're giving iterative feedback. And then you get to the end of that, and if you decide, after all this discussion, and people say, well, I think, well, in these meetings, well, it's good, but this isn't, this is, and then somehow you decide you need to deny it, you're the ones who have actually given them that iterative feedback as to your expectation, and without.
But in that case, that's the process. You make the final determination. It's up to you folks. So, the fact that you let them justify it doesn't guarantee them approval.
Okay, as long as that's the case and we're not boxing ourselves in.
Yeah, but I do understand what you're saying. We say, yeah, this is this is what we believe has to be done so that you can, based on our recommendation, someone goes ahead and does it, they come back and go, nope, sorry. But that's, I think, what the danger is. And I don't know how you avoid that, because they have a right to say.
Absent a formal approval, they have no right to go do anything. So in other words, if something reaches the fact that it's a resolution, and your resolution basically says, for lack of a better, I need a black roof on this building to comply with the district you're in, and you go out there and they have a brown roof on the building, they're in violation. I've had a planning board actually make the man rip the roof off the structure and put the proper color on it. Nothing becomes doable until they have a final approval. And whatever form that final approval takes. If you granted them a final approval and then don't like it, that's on you.
Of course.
But if they've done something or they've advanced and you haven't issued an approval, they have no vested rights. Until that approval's issued, it's open season. And new information, new facts that change it.
And we did have someone come in that had the whole idea, I can't remember who it was, because we said so many people, but he had this whole idea about doing a small development, and he presented his ideas, little sketches, and it was like, it was not feasible. He said, thank you, and he walked away from it, and he didn't cost money.
Right.
So it's good.
Yeah. You can always preface the conversation, if you want to, by saying this is just conceptual review, please be aware this is environmental board.
So we just say our recommendation with the disclaimer, this does not ensure that it will be approved.
Probably, that's
Yeah,
probably.
that's probably the best thing to do. I would like for you guys to go into executive session for less than 5 minutes.
Regarding?
It's 1:30 in the morning.
No, fuck up there, cowboy.
Is it a litigation matter?
It's not a litigation matter.
Well,
It was basically when I brought up the language of the resolution, something, the planning board approval can be revoked if it's,
That's how it was on the block. It's pretty much right out of the zone block. Yeah. It would not.
it's basically the
Yeah.
town's ability to review projects and see if they are sticking to what was planned.
If you want to have advice of counsel, sort of a legal discussion that has about the zoning law. Is that what you're doing? Yeah, no, you don't know.
All right, well, we usually let everybody, we
Well,
this meeting,
advice
so we
to
would
council.
let people talk, but everybody left, so it looks like, no public comment.
Let me ask you, do you usually have public comment?
We have decided to have public
People
comment.
ask permission.
Well, we have decided to allow public comment at the end of meetings and people have questions.
I would like to say.
You have to go up to the mic and it's, yes, you mic.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's just a thought,
Okay.
and it's observation of learning process. We're all learning all the time at all levels. It seems to me that the full significance and complications of the secret process is not totally understood by all the new people on the board. It's something you don't get instantly, that when your experts are trying very hard to give you shortcuts, that the significance of that is difficult to understand in the absence of knowing what a full-scale secret process can be. And that's just from years of watching and learning.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Anybody else have any public comment? No?
I just,
Just hanging out.
I just wanted to, because I just recently made that submission, I just wanted to ask the board for whether or not I should be bringing paper copies of the Cascade subdivision.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's talk about, Judy, what's on the agenda for the 25th?
That one.
Okay, what else?
I thought it was gonna be excused.
So close. was so close.
I tried.
Let's see, public hearing on OSI and Silo Condo B&E, 2 public
Okay.
hearings. Cascade Mountain Lands, but I have nothing yet on that for an update, and Cascade Creek, we just got.
Okay.
That's all I got.
And did you drop off any paper copies of that?
No, I sent an email asking whether or not the board wanted paper copies ahead of going through the findings. I can drop them off tomorrow.
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
what
I
the-
know, I always like paper copy.
Oh,
Yeah, all right,
all right. I'll just do a full paper copy submission then, and
cool.
cool. All right.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So we're definitely on the agenda for the next meeting.
25th.
That's what I put on there, yeah.
I'm sorry, Judy. Who said?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And the board want us to try to work with that to provide draft findings, so there's updated, what we provided previously.
Why don't we review it? I don't know, where's the board on there? You want them to proactively draft findings, or do you want to review it and then get back to all of that?
I think you should proactively do something with this draft findings and look at it. I mean, I think that's always helpful.
And minimize the subjective language.
That I would request.
Okay.
It was focused on the one issue of whether the lands were truly being served, right?
That was one of the issues, and then there was a few others that came up.
Or more moderate.
Yeah, so we'll take a look.
Yeah. Just to explain to the board, what I've done is I went through and all the new text that goes into the utilities, the protections offered by being public waters, I have highlighted all of that in red. So all of that text that was requested, that's all in red, so it should be very easy to find. And again, I'll print it out and I'll drop it off tomorrow. All right?
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I'm sorry,
Are we going into advice council?
do you want anybody to council, you want,
I want to, the people mentioned
Yes.
one thing.
Okay,
okay.
we're gonna do that.
Should we work on it, look like it's like-
Okay.